Welcome to Commander Central, episode 347, and today we're taking a look at cards from Phyrexia, All Will Be One. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
Max, how's it going today, bud?
Pretty good. It's a Thursday morning, so ready for the long weekend I have ahead of me.
Your voice sounds like it's getting there.
It is getting there, yes. I used it quite a bit this past weekend. You
did?
So I'm trying to recoup. Monday it did not sound this good.
You got quite a bit of magic in over the weekend, though, and we got to hang out and had a pretty good time.
Yeah, it was a great weekend.
I'm still somewhat recovering from that as well. Like this week, I was just like, I just need to sleep and not eat at restaurants, and because we went out quite a bit, and I had a good time. But yeah, I needed to bounce back a little bit. Oh well, getting old. That's what happens.
Yep.
Chris is doing pretty well. For anyone who wants any updates, he is still over at Mayo Clinic recovering, but he's doing all right. So hopefully we'll have him back on here in a couple weeks. We're looking at probably every other week for this foreseeable future till we get to that point where we can have him on for 350. That's the kind of plan for right now. We'll update y'all if anything changes there, but that's really it for like personal life stuff.
Yeah.
Games we played stuff. I'm going to share this one because it was a streamed game. So if you happen to be watching EDH Recast stream last night, you got to see some ridiculous stuff go down. So I survived in a game. I was playing my Glissa deck, which is always a mistake for the second game of the night, but I didn't screw it up too badly. But here would be an example of why that deck is one I shouldn't play late at night. I was at 9 life. I had a Vidalcan Orrery in play, so I could do stuff at flash speed. Joey from EDH Recast had dropped a Walking Ballista with 10 counters on it. So he was like basically daring me to do something, and he was going to kill me if things got out of hand. He got attacked, and so like just to solve the problem, he went to remove 9 counters, 9 life to kill me, and then put the last damage onto somebody else. So with the Walking Ballista damage on the stack, or at least the last damage, because it takes me down to 1 life, and the last one is on the stack. I had a Death Touch creature wearing Viridian Longbow, so I tapped the Viridian Longbow to do 1 damage to a creature. Because a creature has Death Touch, it will kill the thing and do damage to. With that trigger on the stack, because I had, and of course now the last Ballista trigger is also on the stack, and I have Vidalcan Orrery out, I'm able to flash in Sidisi Undead Vizier, flash in Sidisi, sacrifice something to Sidisi's exploit trigger, so I can tutor up the new Shieldred. I'm able to then flash in Shieldred with the stack still unresolved. Shieldred resolves, then I let the stack continue to resolve. The creature that took the Death Touch damage then died. I had Harvester of Souls in play, so that generated a draw trigger, which drew me a card, which gained me 2 life because of Shieldred. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life, which put me up to 11. Then the Ballista resolved, taking me down to 1 life again. So rather than dying, I was able to, all with that in the stack, save myself with Shieldred, and then the Ballista died, of course, removing the counter, so I drew 1 more card off the Harvester of Souls, which took me back up, and then I was able to squeak my life back up, and I did finish the game at 40 and wound up winning. So, death on the stack, and I fought through it.
Like only Dana Roach can, everybody.
And I will also add, after surviving that, on the next turn, Angelo Guerrero, who goes by the Jess guy on Twitter, Angelo went to attack me at some point, I think after that survival, I was back up to, got up to like 14 or something. Angelo swung at me with a 7/7 or an 8/8 that I didn't block. He flashed an Embercleave that should have been lethal. Angelo was at 2 life, except for the creature was also wearing Sword of Fire and Ice.
So it had pro red.
And it had double, I think we actually even missed that part, that they couldn't even wear the Embercleave. But the other part was, so actually we screwed that up. Yeah, I couldn't have worn the Embercleave, because he had actually been unable to equip blue equipment prior to that anyway. But the thing that we laughed about was, he was going to die to the Sword of Fire and Ice trigger, because Sword of Fire and Ice, it would be double strike, so it would deal first strike damage first, which would proc the Sword of Fire and Ice, drawing him a card.
Yep.
Because the Shieldred trigger would have killed him. So the whole thing wound up being irrelevant anyway, but it was just, he actually, that was funny, that game, he got screwed over by the Sword of Fire and Ice having pro blue 3 different times. So yeah, it was just a dumb, ridiculous game with a bunch of fun stuff in the stack. So I just wanted to share how dumb that was. But no, it's a good point, Max. I think we had missed the fact that he couldn't even equip the Embercleave in the first place. So ridiculous. That's why Commander's fun. Dumb stuff.
Yeah, like dropping an entire deck of green creatures and killing a table. That was
Yeah,
fun.
you blew everyone up with
No,
Gnawbones.
with Gnawbones.
Yeah, we had real good games over the weekend. I think we played like 10 different games between Friday night and Saturday.
Yeah, I think, probably 10 games, so
Mhm.
I'm good for like 6 months.
Right.
Yeah. See everybody in Minneapolis.
Peace out. So should we jump into these Phyrexia All as One cards? Because there's a lot of cards that are really good in this set.
They're like generically good almost. Like, it was really hard picking ones that I found interesting that just weren't like, yep, I can see this going in a bunch of standard, like typical decks. It was
Sure.
just kind of struggling for me.
I mean, this felt like this is the strongest set I felt like I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
So let's kind of go by categories here, colors or whatever. Any lands worth talking about? Because there's a lot of lands here, but I feel like they're pretty narrow. Is there anything that jumps out at you that you kind of liked?
Not really. I mean, they're all like the spheres and the orbs, right?
Yeah. So the fast lands got a reprint, which they needed it. Those are the ones that come into play tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. So we got that cycle reprinted. I don't love those necessarily. I tend to not play super fast decks, so like they basically for me are kind of guild gates. I really don't care, but they can play in other formats, so that's always useful to have a reprint. We had the cycle of monocolor spheres that are named after the different spheres on New Phyrexia, so like the Fair Basilica, the Autonomous Furnace. They have a sphere subtype, which is relevant for a couple cards, but like not that many. They come into play tapped. They tap for the appropriate color, so like the Fair Basilica taps for white, and you can spend 1 and the appropriate color, so again, Fair Basilica, 1 and a white to sacrifice it to draw a card. So like they are the come into play tapped version of like the Horizon lands, kind of. I was kind of disappointed in these. The art on them is pretty great, but that they're almost like worse cycling lands. Do those interest you at all, Max?
No. I mean, they enter tapped. They only make a color, and spending 2 to draw a card, I think, especially needing the color, is kind of not great, where there's stuff like Roadside Reliquary,
Right.
you just need artifacts and enchantments, and it's colorless mana for 2 mana to sacrifice it, you know?
And it's draw 2. Or at least very often it is. Yeah, they're fine. Maybe there's some specific deck where you sacrifice stuff, and if you're playing a green deck and you have access to Crucible of Worlds and the new green version of Crucible of Worlds or something, or you're doing a lot of playing lands out of your graveyard, or you're playing Titania, who cares about lands in their graveyard, whatever, I'm sure the green one will be useful to you, but I think generally they didn't really matter to me at all. There's a couple that are maybe worth mentioning. The Mirex, or just Mirex, I guess, taps for a colorless, and you can spend 3 to create a Phyrexian Might creature token with Toxic 1. I guess any land that you can tap to make a creature has some use in some decks. I don't know if my artifact deck wants it, but I'm considering it. So like that's one, it's not always something you can skull clamp, or if like you're playing in some kind of like a sacrifice deck or something, that's always useful. I think the best one though of this kind of sphere cycle is the Mycosynth Gardens. Taps for a colorless. You can spend 1 and tap it for any color, which is not that useful, but you can spend X and tap it, and it becomes a copy of target non-token artifact you control with mana value X. So if you spend 1, it becomes a copy of a Soul Ring. If you spend, 11, it becomes a copy of a Blightsteel Colossus. And that's not to end a turn, that's permanently. So you lose a land, but it becomes a copy of the thing you copy. I think there's a lot of decks where that's pretty good. If you're playing an equipment deck or something, is where one of the decks where I was eyeballing it, like, you drop it as a land early on, you just use it, and like late in the game, if you need some extra gas, just turn it into a piece of equipment and equip it. But like, even if you just want to run it in a deck and at some point have some, because like it isn't sorcery speed either. So like, well, I didn't use my mana this turn, I might as well do something. I'm going to turn this Mycosynth Garden into a copy of that person's Threat Dynamo.
Yeah.
Like I think it's really solid. I was looking at slotting it into quite a few decks, and this is the kind of card I could see really overperforming. It's not busted, but like I feel like it's pretty useful in a lot of situations.
Yeah, that's just going to be broken. I don't like that.
But yeah, for lands, it's really good. There's like quite a few of them, but nothing that was necessarily that exciting. Colorless, I guess we'll go up the list. This is a Phyrexian set, but really there's not necessarily that many colorless artifacts here. A lot of stuff was colored, and they've been doing that more and more. I understand the logic behind it. They want to. The thought process is by making artifacts colored, they can narrow down the amount of decks they go in, so they can make things a little bit more powerful, a little more interesting, without having to worry about toning them down because they can go everywhere. And we see quite a bit of that in the last several sets, and we're seeing that here. So the first and foremost one I guess I will mention is sort of Forge and Frontier. That's the protection from Gruul Sword. So creature gets +2/+2 and pro red and pro green. When it deals combat damage to a player, exile the top 2 cards of your library, and you can play those cards this turn, so you have a 2-card impulse draw. And you can also play an additional land this turn. That's pretty good, I think. Seems like it's pretty good. It's, it's functionally draw and an additional land, and there's a good chance you'll hit a land on one of those 2 cards, and I like that one a lot. That's going to go into my equipment deck. Does that one do much for you, Max?
I mean, not really. I don't run most of these swords in any of my decks, but I like that we're getting the cycle completed. I'm always a fan of that, and it's really cool to see it show up in Standard versus like Modern Horizons 3 or Battle Bond 2 or something.
And maybe you'll, if there's Faldhorn and there's Prosper and there's decks that like care about being able to cast stuff from exile as well. So like this might wind up having a home in those decks also, in addition to, equipment decks. But like if you're playing an equipment deck, which I have one of, this is going to go in there. I like it a lot. Any other of the colorless artifacts you liked, Max?
Not really. None of these really spoke to me. I think it's cool that there's kind of a new staff of domination and staff of completion. But yeah, I just really wasn't impressed with these colorless artifacts.
I think a couple of the Skull Bombs, which is the cycle that they've done before when they are on Mirrodin or New Phyrexia or whatever, where you can say, in this case, they all have they're colorless, they cost 1 to cast, and they have a 1-mana sacrifice to draw a card ability, and they have a second ability that does something kind of appropriate for the color. So the black one, the Dross Skull Bomb, sacrifice it and return a target creature from your graveyard to your hand, and then draw a card. So as an activated ability, you can sacrifice it. The red one, you put 2 oil counters on a thing. The green one, target creature gets +3/+3 till end of turn. So those are interesting, and they tend to, I don't think any deck tends to want to run all of them, but like my Glissa deck I was looking at, like, oh, the green one's not bad for my Glissa deck, and I can recur it and reuse it. And so that cycles tends to wind up having 1 or 2 cards that are kind of useful in a narrow location like that. But yeah, I mean, it feels like they put all of the super interesting artifacts over into the colored slots. The other one I see people talk about a little bit here is Soulless Jailer. It's a 2-mana 0/4 creature, Phyrexian Golem. Permanent cards in graveyards can't enter the battlefield, and players can't cast non-creature spells from graveyards or exile. So it's like kind of a Grafdigger's Cage effect on a body, but it also hoses impulse draw stuff. Any thoughts on that one, Max?
I mean, if I played against more like graveyard decks, they'd be probably good to put into a bunch of stuff, but I don't really see that a lot.
Yeah.
In the groups we play with, at least.
Well, even if I do, I feel like something like Soul Guide Lantern, I can drop it, and if someone, short of a Corrosive Grip, if the graveyard player goes to remove it, I can just crack it, and maybe that doesn't do me any good in 2 turns, but like for that turn, I can blank their graveyard. I can empty it out. Soulless Jailer, permanent cards can enter the battlefield. Well, if someone goes to remove it, they just remove it, and then they can immediately play it from their graveyard. So there's advantages to it being a creature. It also, like I said, it stops impulse, or at least some impulse draw, since it affects non-creature spells. Creatures can still be played. I think it's a good card. It's probably maybe even better in other formats, but the consistency of something like Soul Guide Lantern to me is more useful than having it on a body that's easier to stop, I think.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Okay, should we take a look at anything in the multicolor section that you find interesting?
I'm a huge fan of like seeing all these characters we've known from the past start to get like completed. Like I really like seeing like Azuri just becoming a Phyrexian. That was cool. Like Jorkadine is back. Like that's a character we know from other planes.
Venser's dead body.
Yeah, poor Venser.
Poor Venser. Actually, the one thing, so among these colored cards too, we got both the completed planeswalkers and non-completed planeswalkers. The one thing I thought I do find interesting about this list is it feels like you're looking at kind of the new guard of planeswalkers. For so many years, we had the Jace, Chandra, Gideon, Liliana group, and they're, not to spoil the story, but at this point, I think it's too late. A lot of those characters getting killed off, and like we're seeing Tyvar moving to the forefront, and we're seeing characters like Kaido, Kaya. So like, I don't know, I kind of like that. I like the fact that we're seeing a changing of the guard, and I understand some folks are bummed out that their favorite planeswalker, a Johnny or Jace or whomever, seems to be being killed off, but I like that the story has stakes.
Yeah. Do we think that the Wanderer is the new leader?
They seem to be kind of setting that up a little bit, yeah.
I'd be down for that.
Yeah.
No more Jace.
Exactly.
Shucks.
So among these colorless ones, there's the multicolored ones. Like we have the new Atraxa, same kind of keyword soup we had before, and it kind of does a thing that the 5-color Niv Mizzet did, where when it comes into play, you look at the top 10 cards of your library, and you can, put a card of different types into your hand. And I'm not sure if we've talked about the fact that it's listing battle as a card type now. And there's no battle cards in the set, so battle is clearly a breadcrumb for something probably in the next set, I'm guessing.
Yeah, most likely. I mean, because the next one is the March of the Machines, right? Where we actually duke it out, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a cool little breadcrumb that they've stashed there. There's a lot of interesting ones here. I actually am probably going to turn my Glissa the Trader deck into a Glissa Sunslayer deck.
Really?
Yeah. It's always been kind of torn between two different worlds, between the artifact recursion and doing the death touch stuff. And I have a couple other artifact decks, so I think like Glissa Sunslayer will let me just lean into more doing death touch things than I will worrying about like trying to recur baubles and do that kind of goofy stuff.
Gotcha.
And I intentionally, talking about the game at the start of the show that I talked about last night, I did not play Glissa that game. I didn't cast her intentionally because I kind of wanted to focus more on doing stuff with the creatures and doing death touch stuff than I did with trying to recur things. And obviously, a bunch of flukish things had to happen for me to win, but like I enjoyed playing that since I have other decks that do artifact things, whereas nothing really is going to be doing death touch centric stuff. So yeah, I'm considering making that swap, and I probably will. I'll at least test it out. One thing I do like about a lot of the planeswalkers here, most of them have a minus ability, particularly a big minus ability that you can use right away, and it doesn't kill the planeswalker off. It gets them close, but like Luca's ability, for example, he comes into play with 5 loyalty and he's got a -4. Luca deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures or planeswalkers, where X is greatest power among creatures you control when you act with this ability. So you drop Luca, and if you've got like a 10/10 in play, you -5 Luca, or -4 Luca, Luca survives, still there for next turn, and you can hammer 4 or 5 creatures because you can divide it any way you want to divide it up. So I clean a chunk of the board, assuming you're playing something in Gruul that has a big body, which, is every Gruul deck. Do a partial board wipe and still have Luca around next turn to, use the +1 and add 2 mana to your mana pool or something. So most of these completed planeswalkers I think are actually pretty decent, and actually I'm going to probably give Luca a try. But yeah, there's a lot of these that just feel interesting to me. I liked.
Yeah, I really like the completed aspect, where the fact that if you pay the life, they enter with fewer loyalty counters.
Mm-hmm.
So like, that's a big game time decision. Do you cheat out this Nissa early for 5 mana instead of 9 or 7, but now you can't activate that big ult at -7.
Yeah. There's in half of these among the gold cards, the multicolor cards, half of them are legends.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different thing, talking about like how you build a commander deck around them. There's a lot of these are interesting cards, and I think they probably a lot of them work better atop a deck than they do in a deck.
Yeah.
So, any other ones here before we move on that you like, Max?
I kind of like Ovika Enigma Goliath. So this is the 7 mana Izzet legendary nightmare that has flying and ward 3 if you pay 3 life, but whenever you cast non-creature spells, you make that many red goblins with haste, where X is the mana value of the spell. So I think that's really cool. Another way to make Spellslinger decks do more than just, ping people with your goblins or anything like that.
Yeah,
I can't even remember that card name. Goblin Electromancer? Nope. Sharp.
Gutter Snipe.
Yes, Gutter Snipe. There we go.
Yeah, no, I like this too. It's doing a thing that you kind of want to be doing in those colors, which is casting spells, but it's rewarding you in a different way. So, like, rather than just encouraging you to cast spells to do damage, which deals more damage, or whatever you want whatever your Spellslinger archetype winds up being. In this case, you're making creatures, so like you're going to be wanting to also probably put some other spells in here to buff those creatures and finding that balance. Hey, if if you're going to run some of those red spells that like until end of turn, all creatures you control get +2/+0. Well, that's going to make you goblins along the way. So, like, it's going to buff the goblins you already have for a swing while making you more goblins.
Right. And then you throw stuff in like the Kindred Discovery where
Right.
you're going to draw a card every time a goblin enters the battlefield.
Exactly. Shared animosity kind of stuff where it gives all your goblins a bump for each goblins you control, whatever. Yeah, there's a handful of those things that definitely work very nicely here. Yeah, no, that one's cool. That one's cool. I don't have anything else for gold, so if you don't either, we can move on here.
Let's move on.
All right. Let's go through Wooburg order. What do you like among the white cards, Max?
I like, let me look at my list here. One white card for sure I like, and that is the Phyrexian Vindicator.
That's just a cool card.
It's just a cool card. It's 4 white mana for a 5/5 with flying, and if damage would be dealt to it, prevent it, and any damage that's prevented this way, Vindicator deals that much damage to any other target. That's just going to be a chump blocker in Dromoka.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I suppose.
I think the 4 white pips might be a challenge, though, so I don't know if it's actually going to go in that deck.
Try it out. If it doesn't work, you can pull it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun. And it's a great throwback to Obliterator. The 4 pips makes it feel pretty fair. Really weird art. Yeah, I like the card a lot. There's some really solid stuff. Mondrak, Glory's Dominus. We had a cycle of these mythic Dominuses in each color, so there's 5 of them. Mondrak is the white one, 2 white. If 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many tokens are created instead, and it's a 4/4. If that's all the card said, and that this is true of all those Dominuses, that would be really solid. But for 1 and double Phyrexian, so you can either spend 1 and 4 life, or 1 and 2 white mana, sacrifice 2 other artifacts or creatures, and put an indestructible counter on Mondrak Glory Dominus. So for really a pretty minimal cost, you can also make that 4/4 doubler into something that's indestructible. That's dumb.
It's so dumb. Like, it's almost like the reverse of the Miosians from old school Kamigawa, where those you remove the divinity counter to do something, and here you got to put something on these things.
Yeah, that second portion seems unnecessary, but super good card.
Yeah.
I like Norn's Wellspring. I don't have a deck that wants it necessarily. It's 1 and a white for an artifact. Whenever a creature you control dies, you scry 1 and you put an oil counter on it, and you can spend 1 and tap it to remove 2 oil counters from Norn's Wellspring and draw a card. So being able to scry whenever a creature you control dies is pretty useful, and it's in white, being able to spend 1 mana to tap a thing to draw a card is pretty useful. The problem is I don't have any, I don't know if it's good enough to run and just hope creatures you control die to put oil counters on it, and that's much more if this was a black card, I would be much more excited about it, but I feel like in white, it's much tougher to consistently put oil counters on it in a way that allows you to use it as a draw spell.
Yeah, I looked at this one, and I don't know, for whatever reason, I instantly think of, Toma Legends when I see this. And I love Toma Legends. It doesn't have this cool scry part on it, but you still have to pay mana, and you're only getting 1 card.
Right.
And so, unless you have a way to untap all your artifacts in white or white X every turn, you're drawing 1 card for removing 2 counters. So like you said, you got to figure out how to kill your own stuff, and then figure out a way to abuse this, which in EDH isn't going to be hard, but it's also not going to be super easy, especially if you stick to mono white.
And you have a black-white deck that sacrifices a lot of creatures, which is, I'm forgetting the commanders now.
Regna and Krav.
Regna and Krav, that's right. And that does a ton of sacrifice stuff, but you also are in black-white. You already have a bunch of ways to draw cards.
Right, and I'm sacking stuff in that deck to the commander who says, sacrifice creatures, gain life, draw cards, right on it. So, this is just...
It's unnecessary. It's one of those cards that I like a lot, but I feel like the colors it's in render it tough to use, and the colors that would make it good to use make it unnecessary almost.
Yeah, 100% agree.
So, just because maybe there's some corner case I'm missing where it's like, oh, it's great in this one spot. And hey, being able to scry whenever something dies is useful, but I think it's tough to make it as good as maybe people want it to be. Skrull's Hive, 1 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. And Toxic is basically the fixed infect. It, number 1, doesn't do the -1 counters on a thing, and it doesn't scale. So, Toxic 1 means if the creature's a 1/1, it puts 1 poison counter on him. If it's a 50/50, it puts 1 poison counter on him. It doesn't matter. It also has what's called Corrupted, which is a keyword. As long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control with Toxic have lifelink. But primarily, this is just going to be White's version of Bitter Blossom, where every turn you make a token and lose a life.
Yep.
Is this good enough for Regna and Krav?
No, because they don't fly.
Oh, sure.
That's the one nice thing about those fairy tokens is they
Yeah,
fly.
that's what's
And I
amazing
can
with Bear
block with
Blossom.
them. I can block with them.
Yeah. I like Sprawl's Hive, and I guarantee I'll see play. But yeah, again, one of those things I don't have a deck for.
Yeah.
Any other white ones that you like or want to talk about?
Nope, I'm good on the white cards. Let's move on to blue.
All right, blue. What do you like in blue, Max?
Let's just talk about the most broken blue card in the set, and that's Ecor Moon Gauntlet.
What? What? What and why?
It's 2 and a blue for an artifact, and it says planeswalkers you control have, for 0 loyalty, proliferate, and for -12 loyalty, take an extra turn after this one. But folks, that's not all. If you call now, you also get, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent. So, yay more spellcasting and making my planeswalkers infinitely big.
Yeah.
This doesn't need to exist. Why does this exist?
It does not need to exist.
In blue of all colors,
yeah.
Why is it in blue? I get it shouldn't be colorless, but why blue?
Yeah, those clauses are if this card only had either one of those two clauses, it's still pretty playable. Like if all it did was gave planeswalkers the 0 proliferate and the -12 take an extra turn after this one, that's probably pretty playable in some kind of a blue Super Friends deck.
Yeah, you'd see it in tons of Super Friends decks that run blue.
Similarly, if it just said whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter on there, that's probably pretty playable in a whole bunch of blue decks too.
Yeah.
And having them both on the same card seems really unnecessary.
For 3 mana. Why?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think this is not going to get into oh my god, this needs to get banned immediately. But it just seems like a lot of stuff on one card for just 3 mana.
Yeah, agreed.
And it'd be different. I'd be like, oh, if this was trip blue, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe that's all those blue pips are going to keep it under control. But yeah, just 2 and a blue makes it super splashable too.
They should have just went WUBRG with it and made it 5-color WUBRG to cast, and then you limit what decks it can go in.
Sure.
Sure, we'd start seeing more 5-color Super Friends decks, but I'd be okay with that, knowing this just can't pop up in anything that runs blue now.
Yeah. It's a ridiculous card. Anything else you like here?
Not really. A lot of these are just not so great counter spells, to be honest.
There's quite a few of those. I think there's a couple interesting things here. First of all, we have this whole the Twilight cycle, which is a callback to the Zenith cycle before. It's all an X and something. I don't think any of those are necessarily that interesting. I'm sure there's people that will like them in some specific deck. Encroaching Mycosynth, 3 and a blue for an artifact. Non-land permanents you control are artifacts. Same is true for permanent spells you control and non-land permanent cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So it's a fixed Mycosynth lattice. It's in blue. It only affects your stuff. There's probably still combos for it, but it's not nearly as egregious as Mycosynth Lattice is. I'm looking at maybe trying it in a deck, but it's interesting at least, and it's like I said, I like fixed versions of cards sometimes that keep a busted thing from happening.
Yeah.
There's a couple. The Jace is I won't.
Not good.
Yeah,
either?
yeah. I mean, maybe in a mill deck because he comes into play. So you could spend 3 mana and 2 life if you want. That seems pretty efficient. Or you can spend the 4 mana and immediately if you want to -5 him. So target player mills 3 times X cards. So if you want to kill him off right away, it becomes a 3 mana target player mills 15. That's a pretty decent rate of return for a mill effect.
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't know. I'm sure he's going to be good in Standard and Pioneer because
sure.
Jace Architect thought, from what I can remember, so please don't get mad at me, Internet, that was a pretty good in Standard too because it was all built around control and that was just giving something -1, -0.
Yep.
So this at least is doing a little more than that.
And that +1 actually, if this comes down, the +1 until your next turn, 1 target creature gets -3, -0. Yeah, that is particularly in a limited environment or even maybe Standard, that can shut off a deck pretty easily. That's a lot of control.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting. EDH, it's less so. I think maybe someone in a mill deck will want it, but yeah, there's some, kind of mediocre counter spells and stuff in here. I like Tamiyo's Logbook. Big problem with Tamiyo's Logbook, it's 2 and a blue, and then you can spend 5 in a blue to tap it to draw a card. But this ability costs 1 less for each other artifact you control. So there's a lot of artifact decks where that's nothing. It winds up being a blue to tap and draw a card. But again, this is kind of the opposite problem of the well where, yeah, there's a lot of blue decks that have it pretty easily become 1 mana, tap to draw a card, but a lot of draw in blue already that maybe you don't need to jump through those hoops to get to. So yeah, if you don't have a Rhystic Study or a Mystic Remora or one of the other top 6 or 8 blue draw spells and you're in artifacts, and maybe this is good, but like I immediately saw it, I'm like, oh, this is gonna almost always tap for a blue in both my equipment deck and my Vela deck. And then I was like, yeah, but it's still worse than the other 10 draw options I have, or at least slower. Interesting card, and maybe there's some good decks for it, but I do find the blue Dominus, again, is also interesting. It's a flying 3/5 for 4 mana, 2 blue. If you would proliferate twice instead, and then, of course, there's a thing where you can spend Phyrexia mana and a Colorless to put an indestructible counter on it. I actually kind of like that, but it doesn't do proliferate stuff instead, so you have to have this out and do other proliferate effects.
Right.
And then have things that proliferate. I think it makes you jump through an appropriate amount of hoops to actually take advantage of it.
Yeah, no, that's not bad. I kind of like Unctus Grand Meta Tech, just because it's fun to say. But I like, whenever my blue creatures become tapped, you draw and discard.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. It's an anthem, and you can make things into other artifacts. So I like that. I like that a lot.
And it's a nice callback to, what is it, Grand Architect?
Yes.
So it's basically a legendary version of that. So yeah, that's fun. That's a fun one. I've got no decks for it. I'm not going to build it, but I like designs like that for sure. How about black stuff, Max?
So the first one on my list was Vraska's Fall. 2 and a black for an instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker and gets a poison counter. I love cheap removal like this.
Yeah.
That especially can't be abused like a creature can in mono black reanimator decks. Getting rid of planeswalkers is kind of hard in EDH because most people don't want to deal with them, so they'd rather just kill the player. This gets rid of a planeswalker. I just really like it for 3 mana. It's a cool card. Yeah,
the black Dominus is pretty dumb. They're all pretty dumb. We keep saying that. If a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. That's ridiculous. And the white one's really good. We talked about that before, but I feel like doubling tokens is the kind of thing where oh, that's super powerful, but you can still board wipe that and everything goes away. So if someone, doesn't matter how many tokens they make, you can stop it from being impactful if you have the right cards in hand. Whereas something like Drivnod, where if dying causes the triggered ability of a permanent to trigger, that's going to go in decks that are filled with really impactful death triggers already. And once those trigger, it doesn't go away. You if somebody makes a ton of tokens, you can stop those tokens from doing anything most of the time,
right,
if you have the right cards. But in this, once these things start happening, you can't roll that back. There's no okay, he made 40 tokens, but if I top deck a board wipe, I'll be fine. This isn't that. This is oh, they sacrificed 4 things and caused all these death triggers, and I took 11 damage, and they were able to draw 14 cards, and that's just done. So this is going to be frustrating, I think, in a bunch of decks that are already frustrating, like Sir Conrad, for example, where it's already super annoying to try to stop yourself from taking a ton of damage, and now you're going to take twice as much.
Yeah, that's just bonkers.
Yeah.
And there will be people out there that just auto tutor for that.
Exactly, tutor up right away. Yeah. 2 reprints I was shocked to see here. Phyrexian Obliterator, which mentioned before,
right,
back in standard. That is nuts. Super cool card. I've never ever ran it, but I've always loved Obliterator for 4 black trample. If a source would deal damage to Obliterator, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents. If someone drops that in limited, you just scoop. Okay, well, GG. And Phyrexian Arena in standard for first time in forever, and that will hopefully permanently keep that price down to a couple bucks, I'm going to guess.
I hope so.
It also
I need a bunch of copies.
Super cool art, and there's also a Phyrexian text version of it, which is awesome.
Super cool. Yeah.
So yeah, I will probably be picking those up just for flavor for sure. Shieldred's Edict, I want to mention again. It probably a little bit less of an EDH card, but it's 1 and a black for an instant, and you choose 1. Each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature. Each opponent sacrifices a planeswalker, or each opponent sacrifices a creature token. Any edict like that is pretty useful. But what I saw everyone writing was, oh, this is basically for legacy formats, just anti-Merit Lage sideboard tech.
For sure.
Which I thought was pretty funny, because it's one of the few ways to force people to sacrifice that specific creature token in those decks where it's their only token. I thought that was kind of funny. It's I never would have noticed that or thought of that, but that's funny. The Vraska here, 4 black and a Phyrexian, so you just spend it for 5 mana and 2 life, or cast it for 6. 6 loyalty. Her 0 is you draw a card and lose a life and proliferate, so technically it's a 0, but basically it's going to put a counter on her and any other planeswalker and or creature you control. -2, target creature becomes a treasure artifact creature token with the usual treasure abilities. So it's kind of a permanent, it's kind of an elk situation like Oko had. And if target player, -9, if target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of poison counters equal to the difference. So basically, if you -9 her, everyone that or whoever you target gets 9 poison counters, regardless of whatever they have.
Right.
So it will be really good if you're playing any kind of a toxic or poison deck. This is probably an auto include. It's pretty good in any kind of Super Friends deck too because of that proliferate.
Yeah, for real.
So I think that's basically what I had for black, I think. Anything in red here you like?
I mean, I like the horror, the Phyrexian. So that one is, let me find it, because it's not in English on Scryfall. Sulfim Mayhem Dominus. It's another one of these legendary Phyrexian horrors. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or permanent opponent controls, it deals double that damage instead. And of course, you can discard 2 cards for 1 red or 1 Phyrexian to put the indestructible counter on it. I want this card very badly.
Is Obosh still together? Is that where you want it?
Obosh and Blanca.
Oh, sure.
Because Blanca, when you target, he shocks everybody.
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's card is, again, all these Dominuses are insane, and that one is as well. All will be one. The enchantment.
Oh, the namesake card.
Yeah, 3 red. Whenever you put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, all will be one deals that much damage to target opponent. Creature opponent controls or planeswalker and opponent controls. Probably the actual player more often than not. And that's whenever 1 or more counters. Period. So loyalty counters on planeswalkers, +1 counters on creatures, oil counters on stuff from here, shield counters, whatever it winds up being. -1 counters if you're playing in a -1 counter deck. Like, this card is ridiculous, and there's a ton of decks that want it. And not only that, like, I looking at my jury deck, hey, I've got jury and I'm going to roll up jury and somehow put, 20 counters on jury in a bunch of different ways from sacrificing treasures or whatever and deal 20 damage along the way. And then sacrifice jury to dome somebody for 20 damage and then move those counters overall onto the Ozolith and deal 20 damage to somebody else. And then recast jury and move the counters back from the Ozolith onto jury and deal 20. I mean, like, there's a bunch of situations where that kind of thing happens.
I don't like that, Dana. You need to not do that, please.
Ridiculous. What a ridiculous card. Again, I'm not like, I don't think it's going to get banned. I'm not saying that, but yeah, that's a lot. There's a lot going on there for sure.
I'm a big fan of Oxida Finisher. Not for what the card does. The card is just a 7/5 for 7 with affinity for equipment, so it does get cheaper to cast. I like the art because it looks like Gorilla Grodd in his battle armor from DC Comics.
And in an equipment deck, it's just going to wind up being like a 2-mana 7/5 too, which is kind of funny.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. Uribrask's Forge, I like quite a bit. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you put an oil counter on it, and then you create an X/1 red Phyrexian horror creature token with trample and haste, where X is the number of oil counters on it, and you sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. So there's no intervention required here for you to make the thing. So this drops into play on turn 3, hopefully. You put an oil counter on it, and then, that turn you make a 1/1. Next turn it's a 2/1. Next turn it's a 3/1. Trample and haste, so it can swing out right away. And it's a sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step as well. So if you have something that cares about sacrifice stuff, that's there. Because it's an X1, it's skull clampable. Again, it's not going in a gazillion decks, but like there's a lot of decks where that's just a perfect little thing to put in, including my jury deck I just mentioned. So yeah, that's real solid.
I really like Vindictive Flamestoker. This is a 1-drop. It's a 1/2. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put an oil counter on it. And then you can pay 6 and a red to and sacrifice it. You discard your hand and draw 4 cards. That activated ability gets 1 less for every oil counter on it. This is great, again, for Spellslinger decks.
Yeah.
You run out of gas quick. That's what I've been experiencing playtesting Blanca, is your hand empties quickly if you don't have draw sources on the board. And this could easily, you could empty your hand on, turn 5 or turn 6 and then crack this and get 4 cards back.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting cards like that in this set that interact with the mechanics. The whole set just feels really well thought out.
Yeah,
There's a Thrill of Possibilities reprint that just has some really super cool Nahiri art on it that I like a lot too. I thought I would just quick mention.
cool.
That's really all I've gotten red. Do you got anything else?
Nope.
Green. A lot of toxic stuff in green. So if you have a poison deck, there's probably some good toys for you here. Anything you like in particular, Max? I'm going to guess you're going to say the Dominus.
I am going to say the Dominus because you double all your creatures' power and toughness at the beginning of each combat.
Yeah.
Each people.
Yes.
That's everybody's.
It is till end of turn, doesn't stay, but still, like everyone's turn, right? Your creatures are way bigger, including this one.
Yes.
So it's a 4/6 by default, so it's an 8/12 with reach. Now it's 7 mana, 5, which actually makes this one seem like it's probably the fairest of the bunch.
Oh, for sure.
That's really, really good, although green has a bunch of ways to already do that kind of thing. Why I like it is I will probably put it in my Recce deck. Number one, it's just a good card.
Legendary.
It's legendary, draws me a card. But a lot of times, one of the ways I win in that deck is I cast a really big, like, Kamal's Druidic Vow or something, put a bunch of permanents in play, hopefully hit a Concordant Crossroads and a Chroma's Will to give them all haste. Being able to then have them double when I swing in basically means it makes it easier to turn that into a win. Because, like, sometimes I put a bunch of stuff in play and you're like, oh, do I have enough damage to kill everybody? I can kill this person and that person, and then I'm tapped out, and I don't know if I can survive the crackback. This kind of thing guarantees I do. Similarly, there's a new Nissa in here, and same thing. I will probably try her in that deck because her -7 until end of turn. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each forest you control and gain trample. And she comes in and play with 7 loyalties. Like you can immediately use her. She's 3 green, Phyrexian. So if you hard cast her, that's 7 mana. If you don't, it's 5 and 4 life. But again, if I put her in play off Kamal's Druidic Vow or something, I can just immediately -7 her and give all my creatures, probably +8/+8 and trample for the amount of force I have in play or whatever it is. So I will probably be putting both of those in my Recce deck.
Dang.
Yeah. But there's some cool cards. Conduit of Worlds we mentioned earlier as like a new Crucible of World. It's 2 green. You can play lands from your graveyard. In addition, though, since it's green, it costs 1 more than Crucible, and there's a green mana in the cost. It has a tap ability, and you can choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. And if you have not cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. And if you do, you can't cast additional spells this turn, and you can only do it as a sorcery. So you can play an additional card out of your graveyard. You can cast an additional card out of your graveyard if you haven't done anything else, and it keeps you from doing anything else that turn. So I don't know how amazing that is. You'd have to be pretty desperate to limit yourself to like that 1 spell a turn, but it's on there as an option.
Yeah, and I mean, we're getting to the point where there's enough of these type of effects that which one do you run?
What's better for your deck?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Expand the Sphere.
Yeah.
So this is a 4-mana sorcery. You look at the top 6 cards, put up to any 2 lands from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom in a random order. If you put fewer than 2 lands, proliferate equal to the difference. So that's pretty cool. Just a great way to get any 2 lands for 4 mana, as long as they're in that top 6. And out of all the Twilights, I like the green one the best.
Yeah.
X and green, reveal the top X +1 cards of your library, choose a creature and or a land card from among them, put them into your hand. If X is 5 or greater, put them onto the battlefield. That's super good as well.
Mm-hmm. Tyrannix Rex.
Yeah.
It's the green mythic that's like has a gazillion things on it. In this case, it can't be countered. It has trample, it has ward 4, it has haste, it has toxic 4, it's an 8/8 for 7 mana. That's a ridiculous card.
It's so good.
Yeah, Tyvar's Last Stand is kind of interesting.
Oof.
X and green, target creature you control gets XX till end of turn and gains hexproof and indestructible till end of turn. So it's a way to throw something, like someone goes to remove a thing, particularly if you're mid-combat. I'm swinging at you, throw some spell shares, like, or not. Plus it gets +8/+8 because I'm going to tap out.
Yeah.
I don't know if I necessarily have a deck for it, but I like it, and I'm keeping an eye on it. I'm probably going to grab a copy, and I'm not sure where I'm going to put it, but
yeah, same. This is going to go into Blanca just because it would be a nice, like, kill the last player type card.
Yeah.
But I was talking to a buddy of ours about it for Dramoka, and I'm like, it's never going to be used.
Right.
I'm never going to pay X defensively in Dramoka. It's always going to be a defense card. Or something like Blanca, I do want to pay 8 mana into it and, cast it for 9. So I think it all kind of depends on the deck you have and what you want to use it for.
Yeah. The beauty of Tamiyo Safekeeping is it protects any permanent. So like that really, like that enchantment you played, and you're like, I really need this around next turn, and someone goes to remove it, you're like, oh, I'm going to spend 1 green and save it. Tyvar's Last Stand is only creatures. Blot the +X is pretty useful. So you have to, like I said, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. There's some decks where you're like, I don't know if I want to use it because the creature already has hexproof or Indestructible. Or right, like so it feels wasted, like you said in your Dromoka deck. That feels like you're half the card you're not taking advantage of.
Yeah.
Cool though, I like it. That's really all. That's what I've got. I mean, there's a ton of good cards, and if we wanted to, we could another show just talking about stuff like Thrun, the Breaker of Silence. Thrun's a really solid creature, and I recently built a mono green Enchantress deck with the old Thrawn, and this might actually be a little bit better because he has Trample baked in. I don't have to hope I draw Trample to poke through. If he's a 2020, I don't have to hope I have a Trample enchantment. I can just push a damage through immediately. So I actually might change that one out as well. But yeah, there's just all the Twilight cards in each color. We probably could talk about more. There's just a lot of this set is just packed. We didn't even touch Commander cards from the Commander decks.
Right. This feels like the War of the Spark for like this
yes, very much
last 5 years or something.
100%. It's a really good set. I've already started my list and I've got a ton of cards on it that I'm going to pre-order, and and then March of Machines, not far away.
Right, that'll be 3 weeks after.
Right, exactly. So, all right. Well, hopefully that was a little beneficial. We're curious to hear what cards that you guys are all excited for out there. Please reach out to us and tell us what you're into. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, I am Dana. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at YSquishy1. The show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find them on Twitter at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Until next week, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.